On May 29th, 2007, Skybus Airlines, a new American startup, carried out their inaugural flight. It was 3.5 hours late. This was due to a maintenance issue with the aircraft, so they had to substitute it out. But then, not only was the arrival flight delayed, but the 25-minute turnover turned into 50 minutes also, because they had planned to board using 2 doors to cut time, but the portable stairs didn't accommodate wheelchair users. They didn't think about that. They didn't think about a lot, and the airline would be defunct within about 10 months. It's embarrassing. Skybus Airlines Incorporated was first founded all the way back in 2004, and it was founded based off of a possible opportunity that the founder, John Weichel, noticed. You see, America West Airlines had pulled down their Columbus, Ohio hub, leaving a bit of a void for someone else to fill. So he began running around and attempting to raise capital from investors in order to fund a brand new airline, which he would dub Skybus. He actually raised a ton of money, so much that they were the most heavily funded airline in US history. The investors included Fidelity Investments, Morgan Stanley, Nationwide Mutual Capital, and Tiger Management, as well as several others. All told, they had raised an estimated $160 million in startup capital, and it was definitely more than enough to give them a boost early on. See, Skybus was envisioned by Weichel as an ultra-low-cost carrier. Not just a low-cost, no. It was an ultra-low-cost. And they were looking to emulate the business model of Ryanair, combined with the people-friendly attitude of Southwest. Which is a weird combination, since Ryanair is actually known for not being great with its customers, but they get away with it because they're so cheap. Whereas Southwest costs more, but they are generally known to be a lot nicer. But to be fair, affordable pricing and good customer service would be a good combination, so I can't blame them for trying. And they were committed to being the least expensive airline in the industry. And they plan on utilizing multiple different measures that were designed to increase revenue, but decrease costs. And a lot of them would wind up being used by the later Spirit Airlines, which is still in operation as of now. We'll get into the nitty-gritty of that in a moment. On April 24th, 2007, Skybus announced their initial set of 8 destinations, all of which were originating from their hub at Port Columbus International Airport in Columbus, Ohio. Early on, they were planning on only operating a strict point-to-point service, which wouldn't book flights between destination cities that were not Columbus, but they would later announce new flights added onto as they expanded, because the entire business relied on rapid expansion. They would need to cover as much territory as possible in order to drive up the number of potential customers, because they would need to fill planes in order to make any money at all. Though the original business plan didn't actually call for that much expansion, and in many instances, the managers didn't choose the expanded 2 cities on the basis of computer models that they used with the initial destination city decisions. They just kind of chose them because they thought that would make sense. But we live in the age of technology, people. You could at least double check if it's a good idea, but they started not doing that. They've tended to favor smaller, cheaper airports that were near major markets, but not actually in major markets. The reason for this is quite simple, the cheaper part. Airport fees at the smaller places were, well, lower than the big airports, so it would save the company money. Even if it was out of the way, they figured the customers wouldn't mind that as long as the flight was cheap. And they also marketed themselves by selling 10 seats on each flight for $10. 10 for 10, if you will. And several months before beginning operations, the board announced they had hired a new CEO. His name was Bill Defenderfer, and his prior experience in the industry was in-house counsel for Eastern Airlines, as well as being the CEO of Continental Airlines System 1 reservations, so he did have experience. He seemed like a good fit for the job. They received operating approval on March 15th, 2006, and FAA certification on May 10th, 2007, and they started their first flights out of Columbus in late May. But things didn't go smoothly. The airline's initial fleet size was fairly small, dealing with 12 aircraft, all of which were Airbus A319s, which are pretty good planes, so that was fine. But their business model did not do them as many favors as you would think, nor was their management style, well, ideal. For one thing, the fares. The 10 for 10 thing was a thing that they were doing, as advertisements suggested, and they offered other fare sales during their time while still in operation. Though those fares didn't include taxes and other airport fees, which always added at least $10 to a one-way ticket. So the cheapest ticket you could possibly get would be $20, not $10. But that still would be extremely cheap, so it wasn't like anyone was in the mood to complain. At least about that. They would complain about the additional charges, though. See, Skybus charged extra fees for literally everything else that most airlines, even today, kind of just give passengers for being on board. Now, this model is common among European low-cost carriers, but Americans at the time were a little mystified by it, because, frankly, well, let me put this into video game logic. Skybus was adding microtransactions to airlines, is really what they were doing. Now, carry-on baggage, one bag plus one personal item, was free, but checked bags incurred an additional charge. Now, you might say, wait, but airlines do that now, and yes, now, but not back then. Most of the large airlines would allow you to check bags for free up to a point. But Skybus charged for this. The first two bags that were less than 50 pounds were $10 each, if you paid online. They were $12 if you did it at the counter. Why the difference, I don't know, but that's how it worked. And each additional bag past that point was $50 per bag. Overweight baggage, those that were over 50 but less than 75, was charged an extra $25, and they did not accept anything that was over 75 pounds. But despite the fact that you were paying for checking baggage, they didn't through-check luggage onto connecting flights at all, at any point. As such, their customers that were connecting on Skybus flights in Columbus were therefore required to collect any checked baggage, and then recheck it again in Columbus for their second flight, which I'm aware sounds like a complete nightmare. And that's because it is. And the worst part is that even though they were making the customers do this, delayed luggage was nearly a constant issue for them, as they outsourced their ground crews. Seating arrangements on board the planes was actually first come, first served. You didn't get an assigned seat. Passengers paid an extra $10 per person to be allowed to board a flight first, and therefore receive priority seating. The only ones that were ever boarded before these people were passengers with disabilities. And once you were on the plane, that's where the microtransactions really ramped up, because you were trapped, you were their prisoner. You're in their world now. The world of Skybus. Everything from food to drinks to pillows. Pillows was an additional charge, though once you bought them, items didn't need to be returned because, well, you bought them. And in order to maximize food and drink costs, they treated themselves like an amusement park by strictly enforcing a no outside food and drink policy. Yes, even food you bought in the airport, you could not take it on a Skybus plane with you. Ever. It was strictly forbidden because you were gonna give them your money. Give it! Now! Where's my money? They did make exceptions for certain things, like baby formula or baby food, as well as special food for people with medical conditions like diabetes or severe food allergies, or people with religious dietary restrictions like kosher diets. And you think they might cut it off there? That they're already making you pay for things that some airlines will give you complimentary just for flying with them? But no. They were also going full gift shop with this. And I mean that literally. The Skybus aircraft were outfitted as flying gift shops, selling things beyond just drinks and food. They also sold perfumes, handbags, jewelry, watches, clothing, and toiletries. And the airline took the bus portion of the Skybus name just a little far by selling advertising space, both on the exterior of the aircraft as well as the cabin. They didn't last long enough for many to take them up on this, but the point was, companies could pay to repaint their planes in order to advertise a different company. which is fine, but they also did that on the interior of the plane too. The overhead bins, the tray tables, and even the carpet could be bought for advertising purposes that passengers would be forced to stare at constantly. And even their operating style served to be as cheap as possible. Equipment they purchased for the planes was all uniform, all the same, standardized, which does make sense. That was actually a good call. With their utilization of secondary airports, they also pushed to save even more money at the airport by having the passengers board directly from the apron, or the tarmac, rather than using the jetway. With tarmac boarding, they could use 2 sets of stairs to board with both doors, cutting boarding time in half. But this didn't really go smoothly, due to the whole people with disabilities thing, and they also didn't have a call center. Well, how do you get a reservation then? Do you have to go to the airport? No, you have to go online. They were online only, which admittedly was a forward-thinking idea, but in the early 2000s, there were still plenty of customers that would have preferred to call for a reservation, like other airlines still do even now. But you could not do that with Skybus in any way. And then there were their employee wages. Oh boy, this is about to get good. Their flight attendants were paid $9 an hour. Oh, I'm sorry, $9 per flight hour. Yeah, they weren't paid when they were sitting on the ground. Now, you could barely get people to work in a convenience store for $9 an hour, let alone be a flight attendant. Though, Skybus did have a way of compensating for this. The attendants would receive 10% of all sales made during the flight, and they would split all the commissions evenly among all flight attendants. This was a subtle way of pressuring attendants to, well, sell the extra stuff. You want to get paid, flight attendants? Oh, you're gonna sell this stuff. You're gonna sell it. You're gonna hold down these passengers and make them buy our stuff. Do it! Your family will starve. Do you even love your children? As for the pilots, well, you'd think they might pay them a decent amount? No, you fools. This is Skybus. Don't be ridiculous. They were paid well below average, starting about $65,000 a year for captains and $30,000 for first officers. For reference, United at the time would have paid at minimum for a captain $90,000 a year, and that would go up based off of experience. Skybus was paying not anywhere close to that, so how could they expect any pilots to even want to work for them? Well, they tried to compensate them again in other ways. In the crew's case, they were given significant stock options, which yeah, that was really helpful, thanks for that. As well as a profit share package that was pretty unique in the airline industry. And while they weren't paying their crews very well, they weren't overworking them in their defense. Skybus flight crews did not have hardly any overnight trips in any way, which meant that the crew had far fewer hours away from home. They also had higher crew utilization rates for more efficient working schedules. Airbus pilot workdays were roughly 8 to 10 hours long. The industry average was 12 to 14 hours, and pilot work months were 14 to 15 days with no overnights at all. So basically they'd have half the month just off. Average pilots in the US, again, had to work at least 16 to 17 days. So yeah, they were getting paid less, but they were also working less too, and with more efficient schedules. So in management's eyes, it all kinda evened out. But how did they get away with paying less? Wouldn't the unions have said something? Well, yeah, if they had existed. Skybus was one of the few 100% non-union airlines in the US. Though just prior to their shutdown, it did look like the pilots at least were planning on unionizing, but the company didn't last long enough for that to happen. So what the heck really went wrong when it came to Skybus? I mean, obviously their business model might annoy people, but it was cheap, and with enough self-control, you could just not buy their extra stuff and have a pretty decent rate. Well, there was the whole baggage issue, and making passengers recheck their baggage again, because, look, nobody does that. Nobody does that. That's annoying. But also, they just kind of mismanaged themselves into the ground after a while. Many of their cost-cutting measures would wind up blowing up in their face. But on top of all this, they also made news during the Christmas 2007 travel season, and it wasn't good news. They encountered problems with 2 of their planes, and remember, their fleet was not very big, so that was not a small amount of planes. They didn't have de-icing contracts in place in advance of winter, which, okay, look, one of the areas they were servicing was New Hampshire, in New England. It gets cold in New England, guys! With those two planes grounded, they had to cancel 25% of their scheduled service over a 2-day period, which left passengers stranded in many cases. And by March 24th, 2008, Bill Defenderfer, the CEO, remember, had resigned, getting sick of the whole thing, and returned to his previous occupation as an author. But there was at least one part of the Skybus story that wasn't actually their fault. On April 4th, 2008, they announced the cessation of all flights effective with the last scheduled departure of the day, and proceeded to file for bankruptcy protections. When they did this, they actually cited a lagging economy, as well as rising fuel costs. Oil prices were very, very high in 2008, and it was causing problems for all airlines, let alone one like Skybus, which was struggling on its own. They really had no way forward, so they just kind of threw in the towel. Interestingly, John Michael, the founder, remember, actually had left the company just after the first flight started because he felt that he had left it in good hands. And then they crashed and burned in less than a year. He would say after the fact that he wanted control back of the company because if he had been there, this never would have happened, which is debatable, but I mean, maybe, it's hard to say. By the way, Skybus was yet another example of just how not to do a low-priced airline. Look, people can only take so much, and you can't microtransaction out a friggin' plane. Or bare minimum, handle the luggage properly, and let people bring their own food and drink on board, okay? It's really not that big of a deal. And honestly, if you're in the position where you have to upsell random unnecessary stuff on board the plane just to break even, then maybe, and hear me out on this, maybe your tickets are too cheap. Maybe you should just charge more for the tickets and let people have these basic things they've come to expect. But Skybus didn't do that, and they paid for it in the end. Though at least no one went to jail over this. They didn't do anything illegal. I'll give them that. I will give them that. And with that, I am your host, Darkness the Curse, with a very special thank you to my generous patrons, my British Rail critics, and a shout out to my underwater train finders. Some Dude 267, Orange Glass, Benjamin Owens, Panzer Kitsune 131-232, Josh Judson, Metal for Life Guy, Anzac A1, Arthur Roy, Tommy Rossini, Lord Captain Von Thrust III, Joshua Long, Brian, Jack Carson's Railroad Videos, Hayden DeGrow, Master of None, Lord Hoth 444, That Guy with a Beard, Mark Holding, Murder Drone Stall, A-Person723, DM Trouble Typhoon, Alfonso Lapuche, Royal Hudson 2860, Isurfer 1405, Charles Kwiatkowski, Matthew Wolf, Ohio Trucker 1, Mr. Sleepy, Matt Weaver, Alaric Jaspers, Tom Red Lion, NS Productions 8104, Hannah Bird, Hendrick Motorsports Fan 5, Wheeljack 8401, Rescues Greyhounds, Dr. Racer 78, The Baxter, and Caleb Crosswhite. Till next time, this is Darkness. I bid you all a fond farewell.